Hello everyone. In today's video, we will discuss are there other types of contact forces or not. This video is in continuation with the previous video in which we discussed what are contact forces. If you haven't seen that video, then please do check it out, and if you like this video, then please give a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel. Let us consider an example of a ball rolling along the ground. We see that if an external force is not applied to the ball eventually comes to a state of rest. Similarly, let us consider an example of a person riding a bicycle. What happens if a person stops pedaling the cycle? Well, eventually, after moving to a certain distance with a reduced speed, the bicycle comes to a state of rest. Another example in which a car comes to a state of rest after moving a certain distance once the engine is stopped. Also, a boat comes to a state of rest if we stop rowing it. Well, there happens to be a certain common factor in all these examples. We observe that in all these situations, no force appears to be acting, yet their speed gradually decreases. A ball rolling on ground eventually comes to a state of rest. A bicycle comes to a state of rest when not pedaled further. After the engine of the car is stopped, the car eventually comes to a state of rest. When the boat is not rowed any further, it comes to a state of rest. What opposing force is actually acting in all these examples? Also, a question arises, what causes the change in their state of motion? Could some force be acting? Can we guess the direction of the force? The force responsible for changing the state of motion of objects in these examples is called the force of friction. When the ball is rolling along the ground with no external force applied to it, the force of friction acts in the opposite direction of the motion of the ball, as a result of which the ball comes to the state of rest. Similar case arises in the case of the boat which is not rowed further by the person. The force of friction between the water and the boat comes into play, as a result of which the boat comes to the state of rest. The force of friction always acts on all moving objects, and its direction is always opposite to the direction of motion of the object. Like I said, in case of a ball rolling along the ground, the direction of motion and the force of friction are both opposing each other, as a result of which ball eventually reaches a state of rest. Obviously, it arises due to contact. Therefore, force of friction is also an example of contact force. Moving further, we may think that whether it is essential for agent applying a force on an object to always be in contact. Are contact forces the only forces existing? Well, let us discuss. We all know what magnets are and what are their properties. Well, like poles of the magnet always oppose each other, whereas unlike poles always attract each other. Here in case we have north and south attracting each other and north-north repelling. Attraction and repulsion between objects can also be seen as another form of push and pull. Well, obviously, when unlike poles come close to each other, they try to attract each other, whereas when like poles are placed next to each other, they try to repel each other. Therefore, it also happens to be an example of a push and a pull. Obviously, in case of magnets, we didn't have to bring magnets in contact to observe this. Just by placing them near each other, we can see the force of attraction and repulsion between them. We can say that magnets exert force on one another without coming in contact. Therefore, the force exerted by a magnet is an example of non-contact forces because there is no contact between the magnets. Moving on to another example of non-contact force. We all are aware of this experiment. When a comb is rubbed with a silk cloth and is brought near bits of paper, then comb attracts these bits of paper kept here. The comb acquires an electrostatic charge after it has been rubbed with a silk cloth. We may wonder that how are paper bits attracted to the comb and what kind of force is acting between them. The force exerted by a charged body on an uncharged or charged body is called an electrostatic force. Therefore, the force acting between paper bits and the comb happens to be an electrostatic force, which is another example of non-contact force. As comb is not brought in contact with the paper bits, it is just brought near to the paper bits, as a result of which paper bits are attracted to the comb. Let us now discuss another kind of non-contact force. A fruit always falls down to the ground. A ball rolling off the table eventually falls to the ground. A coin slipped from our hands falls to the ground. As soon as it slips, it moves downwards. We observe that the state of motion of coin undergoes a change. Well, we may wonder, can this happen without a force acting on it? Well, no. Then we may wonder, which is this force? Objects and other things fall towards earth because it pulls them. This force is called the force of gravity or just the gravity. It is the force of gravity which pulls all the objects towards the ground. It is gravity which causes fruits or leaves from a tree to fall to the ground. It is gravity as a result of which any object falling off a surface falls to the ground. Water begins to flow downwards as soon as we open the tap is also the result of gravity. It is an attractive force and acts on all the objects. There is a point which should be noted that gravity is not a property of Earth alone. Every object, big or small, exerts a force on every other object. This force is known as a gravitational force. With this, we come to an end of our topic, contact and non-contact forces. In our previous video, we learned about contact forces. For application of contact force, our body has to come in contact with the object. It is not necessary that contact has to be hand on hand. The contact may also be with the help of a stick or a piece of rope, like we discussed. We also discussed the type of contact forces. We discussed what are muscular forces and how muscular forces aid movement of or bending of our body, expansion and contraction of lungs, process of digestion, and much more. We discussed what is friction and how friction acts as an opposing force to the direction of motion of the object. Under non-contact forces, we discussed that there are forces which exist even when bodies are not in contact with each other. We discussed the example of magnet, where attraction and repulsion happen to be another form of push and pull. We discussed electrostatic force and gravitational force as well. With this, we come to an end of our topic force. With the next lecture, we will start discussing what is pressure. If you like this video, then please give a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel. Thank you.